No, no, no.
Okay, what you want. So our game will be on what? For good days left.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, absolutely. No, for different reason, it's the first time, the second is some of times. I've been looking at the Italian Indians, collecting one of the things related to stories of Just the
Just
one
the
that
type.
was before.
Sono stato nel PowerPoint. Dear students, professors, dear guests, good afternoon and welcome to the public lecture, Ethnography of a Police Killing, an Experimentation in Legal Anthropology. This afternoon, we gather to explore a critical and deeply human story that raises essential questions about justice, truth, and our shared societal values. Our lecturer is a luminary in the field of anthropology, sociology, and medicine, Professor Didier Fassin. Professor Fassin is renowned for his interdisciplinary approach and his extraordinary capacity to unravel moral and political issues from both a societal and individual perspective. Holding the chair of moral questions and political issues in contemporary societies at the Collège de France and a position at the Institute for Advanced Study, he has made significant contributions to our understanding of these complex issues. In addition to his professorial duties, Professor Fassin founded the Interdisciplinary Research Institute on Society. His research has spanned Senegal, Congo, South Africa, Ecuador, and France, providing a truly global perspective on the subjects he explores. Professor Fassin's commitment to his work is matched by his commitment to service. As a former vice president of Doctors Without Borders and the current president of the French Medical Committee for Exiles, he has demonstrated an unwavering dedication to humanitarian causes. He has been recognized for his substantial contributions with the gold medal in anthropology at the Swedish Royal Academy of Science, the Nomis Distinguished Scientist Award, and membership in the American Philosophical Society, among other accolades. Professor Fassin will be sharing his research on a deeply troubling and profoundly important case, a police killing in France, highlighting the life of a Roma man and the surrounding circumstances of his death. This investigation has been conducted with painstaking care, drawing from numerous sources to present a comprehensive picture of this tragedy. As we navigate through these difficult waters this afternoon, we will explore alternate narratives, engage with the complexity of truth, and grapple with the implications for justice and societal responsibility. We sincerely thank the French Embassy and the French Institute in Bosnia and Herzegovina for their valuable collaboration. They have greatly contributed to making this event happen. We look forward to continuing this fruitful cooperation in the future. So, without further ado, let us welcome Professor Didier Fassin. His wisdom, empathy, and rigorous academic approach will guide us through today's discussion. Thank you all for being here this afternoon to share in this significant conversation. Professor Fassin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Do I have to?
It's okay.
It's on. Okay. So dobar dan. It's a real honor for me to be speaking at the University of Sarajevo, and especially to conclude this very interesting International Social Science Week. I've seen the program, and it must have been really fascinating. I want to thank Professor Sea Turcialo and the Professor Sanela Basic for inviting me. And also I joined Professor Turcialo to thank the French Embassy, and in particular Mr. Sylvain Rigolet and Mr. Jean-Christophe Thiabaut for making this visit possible. It is for me a special pleasure to be in Bosnia-Herzegovina, not only because it is the first time, which is always something very pleasant to discover a new country, a new city, but for a special reason, which is that I work at the border between Italy and France in the Alps. I've been doing this research for 5 years. And one of the activities that I'm doing is collecting stories of the journeys of refugees and migrants who are traveling on the Balkan route. And of course, your country is on the Balkan route. So these people come from Afghanistan, from Iran, but also because the route through Turkey today is easier for them, coming from Morocco, from Algeria. And in there, the stories they tell, and I have many of them, I have dozens of them. In the stories they tell, there is this special moment at the border between Bosnia and Croatia. And this special moment is for the horrible experience they have with the police and sometimes the militia of Croatia when they try to cross. And not only when they try to cross, but sometimes when they are already in the middle of the country, which is illegal under the European rules. But also they are beaten. Their telephones are broken. Their clothes are taken. Their goods are stolen. Their money as well, and they are sent back with nothing to here, to the other side of the border. And this does not happen one time, not 2 times, but usually it is 5 times, 10 times. One Iranian family I met and worked with 26 times tried to go through this border. And on the most common, I'm not saying the only story, but the most common story is when they get on the Bosnian side, they get a shelter. They can go to a hospital where their wounds can be treated, and non-governmental organizations, some international but some Bosnian, and simply people from villages help them, assist them, bring them food in the abandoned buildings where they stay sometimes for weeks or months before being able to get the energy, the money, the telephone to cross again. So for me, being here has a very special meaning for what I know by these stories of Bosnia-Herzegovina. And by the way, if among my colleagues here, some do research on these situations, on the refugees, the migrants, the borders, I will be very happy to be in contact with them and have exchange with them. But today I will talk about something else, something that might resonate also a little because it's a story of a Roma man. And of course, Roma people in the whole, not especially in this country, but in the whole of Eastern Europe, Romania and Bulgaria in particular are very prevalent. But also because I will try to show you what can be done with ethnography. Ethnography being, for those who are not sufficiently familiar with it, being the fact of being there, living with people for a certain amount of time, and trying to investigate in a qualitative manner through inductive, that is, building little by little the interpretation of facts rather than having an hypothesis and validating this hypothesis through deduction. So this is what I would like to what I would like to do. And the research I will present, ethnography of a police killing, can be considered to be in the field of legal anthropology or criminology as well, although I will do it in a quite unconventional way. And I would like to use this case as a pretext to reflect on truth and truth-telling, on testimony and evidence, on the social role of the social scientist, and on the risks and impact of public ethnography. As you can see, these are too many things, but I hope that I can at least get some of that. So let me explain in which sense the path I am taking is unconventional. Legal anthropology, which is a field within anthropology created, or at least in which Sally Folk Moore played an important role in building it. It is a very rich field with a journal, with programs, with its society, its courses, its manuals, and it's at the very edge of different disciplines. Of course, the classic text is Bronislaw Malinowski's 1926 seminal work, Crime and Custom in Savage Society. But we have, for a century, we've had many works that have been defined mostly in anthropology as comparative studies with oral tradition societies to identify the way in which they deal with disputes, from Max Gluckman among the Barotse people to Laura Nader among the Zapotec communities, as well as with written tradition societies like ours, with formal legal text and judiciary systems from Bernard Cohn in India to Lawrence Rosen in Morocco. So comparative studies have been dominating. In recent decades, without abandoning this perspective, the field has been enriched with studies on legal pluralism, arguing that even in societies with a modern state like ours, the official law is only one of the various ways of dealing with disputes, as shown by Richard Wilson in South Africa and Carol Greenhouse in the United States. But also new studies on human rights and humanitarianism, notably the work of Harry Englund in Malawi and Lisa Malki in Tanzania. Only recently as policing, the work of the police, been researched by anthropologists, by, for example, Jeffrey Martin in Taiwan, Daniel Goldstein in Bolivia, Lawrence Ralph in the United States, to name only 3 of the 11 contributors to the volume I edited a few years ago under the title Writing the World of Policing, the Difference Ethnography Makes. Conversely, prisons have been little studied until at least recently, to the point that even a review of legal anthropology by someone like Tobias Kelly for the Oxford bibliographies did not even mention prison as an entry. So I do not want to pursue this very superficial review that I'm presenting on legal anthropology. But I would like to insist on one element that is common to all these studies. In almost all of them, the anthropologists are the archetypal observers. They describe, they analyze social relation. And while they typically say they are also participant, because when you're on the scene, you're participating in it, they remain very much at a distance from what happens. And this is of course obvious, because you don't want to mingle, you don't want to put yourself in the work of the judges or the lawyers in this situation. You want to analyze what they do, you want to try to understand it, but you don't want to replace them in their work. And this is what I've been doing also in my previous work on police and prison. I did a 15-month ethnography of the police. I did a 4-year ethnography of a prison. And I was exactly that. I was the observer, not intervening in any way, or at least trying not to intervene in any way. What I would like to show to you today is exactly the opposite. It is an unconventional and perhaps questionable way of doing an inquiry into a case of a homicide about which I have re-examined both the facts themselves and the work of law enforcement and the justice system. And this is why I describe it as experimental, because it's unusual to do it this way, and it is something that I try to experiment, and this is this experiment that I will show you now. So it all started with an email that I received 3 years ago from a collective of women called Justice for Angelo, in reference to the death of a 37-year-old Roma man shot by 2 officers of the GIGN, which is the elite unit of the gendarmerie, or the military police in France, which is officially dedicated to terrorist attacks and hostage situations. Almost 24 members of this unit had come to arrest this man, as he was considered a fugitive because he had not returned to prison following his first home leave 1 year after his most recent incarceration. He was let out of the prison. He was supposed to come back after 24 hours, did not come back. He was considered a fugitive. He had received a 27-month prison sentence for repeated minor violations of the law. And he told his family that he could not bear anymore being separated from them, as the correctional facility where he was detained was too far from them to visit him. So the officers had aggressively searched his parents' farm, where they suspected him to be hiding, until they heard a noise in the shed, small room, near the main building of the farm. 5 of them entered this dark room. Shots were heard, then there was a long silence, and the officers told the investigators and the prosecutor that they had to fire in self-defense as the man had surprised them by a savage attack with a knife and had resisted an attempt to bring him under control, first wrestling with him, then via 2 electric shots used to bring him under control. The parents, who were meanwhile held on the ground, handcuffed, only a few yards from the lumber room where the tragedy had occurred, outside of it, said that the gunfire was immediate, not preceded by neither warning nor any sound of fight, as the officers had said. The incident had taken place in the center of France and had not made the national news. In their message, the 3 women who had written to me, they were the victim's sister and 2 of her friends, were asking me to give a talk at a public meeting that they were having to denounce the vicious circle of police, justice, and prison, of which Angelo, who had spent half of his adult life incarcerated, was a victim. So being in the United States at the time, I told them that it was impossible, but that I could send a short text with general ideas drawn from my previous work on these topics. So, of course, not on the case, which I didn't know anything about, but more generally about prison, justice, and police. And they accepted, and the text was read at the meeting. I had never heard of the case before, but I began to be interested in it. Reading the few articles published in the local media, I got intrigued. The version given by the officers seemed very implausible. One had to imagine a frail man, alone, assaulting with what appeared to be a pocket knife. A group of 5 tall officers, super trained for dangerous operations, wearing dark uniforms with balaclavas, helmets, bulletproof jackets, carrying semi-automatic pistols, submachine guns, various types of grenades, and continuing his attack after receiving 2 50,000-volt shocks, which are supposed to paralyze their target and sometimes even cause death, thus giving the officers no other option than to kill him. This was not, however, the opinion of the prosecutor and the judge, who issued 2 years later a final decision dismissing the case, which meant that there would not be a trial. Rather, it was the opinion of the prosecutor and of the second examining judge. Indeed, the first one, who had expressed doubts about the officer's version, even arraigning them to the prosecutor's surprise and the gendarmerie's discontent, was transferred to another jurisdiction a few weeks before issuing her decision, leaving her new colleague, who had never worked in a criminal court, do so in her stead. The dismissal was confirmed in appeal. The family was dismayed. To convince them to be heard by the investigators in the hours following Angelo's death, the prosecutor had promised them that he would do all he could to get the truth. He had somewhat mysteriously added that this would be the judicial truth. The family and the whole traveler community considered they had been cheated. For me, the case seemed to be strangely familiar. It resembled various other cases I knew about, which had the same pattern. A man, generally young, belonging to an ethnic or racial minority, dying as a result of an encounter with the police. An inquiry conducted by colleagues of the presumed perpetrators who confirmed their account. A prosecutor and a judge who accept their version and dismiss the case, invoking legitimate defense. Lives stolen with no justice dispensed, according to the families. Remarkably, in many of these cases, there was a sister who, modern Antigone, decided to fight the state, demonstrating remarkable courage, tenacity, and intelligence in the hope of obtaining justice, as Angelo's sister did. But during the time of the investigation, I had remained in contact with her. And after the first judicial decision was issued, I got to know her personally, as well as her parents, her brothers, and in-laws. I visited them several times in their farm. There were several caravans stationed in the yard. It was where they cooked and slept. Enjoying this, they told me the noise of the drops on the roof when it was raining and expressing nostalgia of a time when travelers did travel. But they had the farm in which they did not really occupy. But our conversation were taking place in front of the main building, and they showed me the car where Angelo was sleeping during his 6 months on the run and the shed where he was killed. At some point during one of my visits, the idea of writing a book about this tragic history came to my mind. So I shared it with the family, and they immediately accepted, even though I insisted that I would not only rely on their version of the event, but would do my own independent inquiry and listen to all their testimonies. In the following month, I interviewed the 5 members of the family who had witnessed the killing a few yards outside of the shed, their lawyer and Angelo's counsel for the case that had led to his imprisonment, the public prosecutor, and the 2 examining magistrates. Despite many requests at the local and national levels of the gendarmerie, I was not authorized to meet with the 2 officers who had shot, but I had for each of them and for the 3 colleagues present at the scene, multiple detailed sworn statements from their interrogations. And finally, I interviewed, there was the journalist and the coroner who never replied to my various emails and phone calls, but I had again the articles of the journalist and the minutes of the hearing of the doctor. So I also gathered the 5 handwritten accounts by family members made just after the event, the 27 witness depositions, the autopsy and ballistics reports, that of the weapon examination, and the toxicology and forensic analysis. The record of the reconstruction of the event by the attorney and of the visit to the farm with the examining magistrate, the text of the prosecutor charges and the defense lawyer's responses, the ruling that had dismissed the case and is upholding on appeal, and the 14 press releases from the support committee and the 28 articles in the regional press. So the material that's collected was, as you can see, overwhelming, full of contradictions. So what could I do with it? After some hesitation, I decided to make it this ethnographic experimentation I was mentioning before in 2 ways. First, experimentation in writing. That's the first part of the book. Second, in conducting a counter-investigation, and that's the second part of the book. So in the first chapter, I used a polyphonic form of writing. For those who know Akira Kurosawa's film Rashomon, which is a wonderful film, which is a story, which is the 4 version of the same crime that has been committed in medieval Japan, in which they all participated, and the 4 versions are completely incompatible. So this is the kind of exercise I did to tell the story in the 3rd person from the perspective of the 2 parents who were present at the scene, of the 2 officers who killed their son, of the sister who was taking a lesson and received the phone call announcing the tragedy, the journalist who wrote the article in a local newspaper, merely reproducing the police version, the coroner who said to his colleague on the radio that the officers had told him that the man had no weapon and whose conversation was recorded unbeknownst to him, the prosecutor and the judges. So by perspective, what I mean is what they said I occurred. This is evidently distinct from Nietzsche's perspectivism as developed in the third essay of the Genealogy of Morals, where when he affirms that, quote, there's only a perspective seeing, only a perspective knowing. In other words, there are as many perspectives as there are viewers, as there are students of a given fact or event. Here, there are indeed multiple perspectives, but we can suppose that some of the protagonists are not candid in presenting their version, that they give a false testimony, either if it's the family to accuse the gendarme, or if it's the officers to defend themselves. So someone is lying or giving a false testimony. Yet in the text, I treat them as if they were all telling the truth. Even using their wording, for instance, Angelo's parents speaking of cops or the officers designating Angelo as the target. So let me illustrate concretely via two narratives of the same initial scene. So the father, from the third person, is on the doorsteps when he sees the gate open and gendarmes dressed in dark uniforms, balaclavas, and helmets, and armed to the teeth, storm into the courtyard. He has just time to say to his son, who is sitting in the little lounge, go hide, pointing to the shed. This space, a lean-to around 20 yards square, attached to the house, is used as a lumber room. It is where he stores the objects he collects to sell in second-hand markets: books of cartoons, old furniture, bicycles, strollers. There's also an air conditioner and a generator. Angelo slips behind him, enters the dark room, and shuts the door. The father sees him disappear. The cops swarm into the courtyard, a lot of them, 15 or so, maybe more. They yell orders. The father sees one of them rush towards him, shouting at him to kneel down with his hands above his head. He refuses to comply. He has never accepted to bow down to the police. The officer pushes him to the ground and makes him lie face down. He uncuffs him behind his back. He points his submachine gun at his head. Don't move or we'll shoot. With his tube in his nose, the father says, I can't breathe. He's severely sick. He needs his oxygen. The gendarme will have none of it. Shut up. Struggling to breathe, the old man nevertheless continues to demand, to protest, to curse. There are 3 disabled people here, he says angrily. His words evidently leave the officers unmoved. A short distance away, his wife, who is sick also, is kneeling on the ground in front of the caravan next to her daughter-in-law. At the side of the house, near the smoking barbecue, his young son and the brother-in-law are, like him, lying flat on the cement with a boot planted in their back and the barrel of a weapon pointed at them. The others have entered the 2 buildings on the farm where the family lives. When they find the door closed, they kick it open. They can be heard overturning furniture, throwing objects across the rooms. When they are finished with the houses, they search the caravans in the same way. After several minutes of this crashing about, they come back out to them, clearly annoyed. They have not found the one they were looking for. Where is he? Where is the fugitive, they roar. The parents reply they have no idea. What do they imagine? That they will give him up to them? Suddenly the father realizes that it would have been better to answer, to tell them that he had gone off in the woods. They might have followed this false trail. He's sorry that he did not think of this in the moment, but it is too late to go back on himself. In any case, the officers have now gathered in the middle of the courtyard. They are whispering among themselves. They seem ready to leave, if only. A noise in the shed. Angelo must have knocked something down. He probably thought that they had left and wanted to move. A dull thud. But the gendarmes have heard it. Two of them advanced with caution, followed by three others. They hold their submachine guns in their hands. The father tenses on the hard surface of the terrace. He would like to shout to his boy, "Give yourself up." But he thinks that it is what he will do. He won't play the hero. It's not his style. The men shove the door open with a crash. They go in. Almost immediately, a burst of gunfire, then a rattle, then nothing. His son had no firearm. It can be him that fired. So it was the cops. Without a word of warning, lying 5 yards away from the entrance of the annex, the father is sure he has heard nothing except the shots, followed by a brief moan and the shout of a gendarme in the garden running toward the store. "All fire, stun grenade him." Now silence. Oppressive. What has happened to his boy? Why aren't they bringing him out if they have captured him? Why do the gendarmes keep coming and going and whispering conspiratorially amongst themselves? Why aren't they telling them anything? What are they hiding? The first officer, he comes out of the caravan that has just been searching. He has just been searching on his own, without result. Like there are two others, he has inspected in the courtyard 3 men and 2 women who have been held by his colleagues and are now under guard. The men lying on the ground are uncuffed. The women are not. They are not easy, these people. They moan, they complain, they hurl about abuse at you. Turning his head, the officer sees 2 of his colleagues go into a shed attached to the main building of the farmhouse. They shout out that they have found the target. An individual belonging to the traveling community was absconded, not coming back to prison. Dangerous, they were told during the briefing for the operation. He may have a firearm. The officer remembers talk about use of hard drugs, cocaine. This potential risk was even the official justification for calling in the GIGN, which is very unusual. But with the gypsies, you never know. The target was therefore pinpointed using geolocation. They were informed that the man had gone to visit his parents that day. The decision was taken to arrest him at his home. They were shown a slide with a map of the site and given the planned outline of the intervention. Like his colleagues, the officer is protected by a heavy bulletproof vest and wears a helmet with a reinforced visor over his balaclava. He's armed with a semi-automatic pistol with 3 clips of 15 cartridges each, a pump-action shotgun, and a small battering ram in case they need to force the entry. He has also 4 stun grenades, a smoke grenade, and a flare, the full panoply. The operation has gone according to plan, at least to begin with. Shortly after midday, the major received the confirmation that the fugitive had arrived at his parents' house. Surrounding access routes were blocked by local gendarmerie units. The little property situated at the end of the village was approached discreetly. The GIGN men arrived hidden in the back of an unmarked truck. The incursion into the courtyard produced the intended effect of surprise. A gendarme shouted, "Police! Everybody on the ground, hands on your head." Several others ran toward the people present in the courtyard, 2 men standing by a barbecue, another older, obese man in front of the main building, further an older woman and a child. During this time, the officer entered one of the farm's building and then investigated 2 caravans. Nobody. It is as he comes out of into the courtyard that he sees his 2 colleagues enter a small annex and hears them call that they have found the target. He rushes he rushes in after them. As soon as he enters the lumber room, he's seized by the laser light held by one of his colleagues, a bare-chested man crouched in the darkness, back on the wall, silent, facing them as they are pointing their guns at him. He hears one of them shout that the target has a knife and order him to drop it, but he does not see the weapon himself. His two colleagues move back. Another pulls out his taser, the electric taser. The electric shock briefly immobilizes the individual, who nevertheless gets up, pulls the wires with his left arm, and throws himself at the two men opposite him. There is a round of gunfire, then another round. The officer cannot make out what has just happened. The man continues to advance, silent, threatening, his right arm raised. He now walks toward the officer, who, despite the short distance between them, has still not seen the knife. He reacts immediately. He fires to stop him, without warning, a single bullet at short distance into the solar plexus. He sees blood flowing over the abdomen. The individual takes one more step, then collapses, head first on the bicycle. The officer puts away his weapon. The room is plunged into darkness once again, except for the wide beam of light coming from the entrance. He glimpses the body lying at his feet. He leans down. The individual seems in a bad shape. He's barely breathing. He gives a weak groan. With the help of one of his colleagues, the officer turns him over and handcuffs him. The aim of the intervention was to arrest him, job done. As he finishes to handcuff him, he thinks that the guy is not far from dead. So when in an ethnographic account like this one, or in a novel, the third person, as you've seen here, is used, it is assumed that the author is adopting the omniscient viewpoint of an all-knowing narrator. Here, on the contrary, the multiplication of the third-person narratives to restitute what has been told at the first person by the various protagonists during their interviews of hearings refuses this godlike perspective. It is a neutral position in which the narrator does not know what happened, and from which he can only accept each version as true, although one of them is probably false. So in the two versions that I presented, I consider them as possibly true. But can the anthropologist or the social scientist leave it there? Should he recognize that there are two incompatible versions between which it is impossible to adjudicate? Should he concede that he has no way of knowing what did happen in the shed? Should he acknowledge that he cannot decide whether the officers were really in danger and did everything in their power to avoid killing Angelo, or either voluntarily or unwillingly shot him without legal justification? There are various possible answers to this question. The anthropologist may consider that it is not his task to resolve criminal cases, or that even if it were, he should not determine whether the truth is in a conflict of interpretation, where the truth is in a conflict of interpretations about a given situation. Or that even if he accepted the first two propositions, considering that he wants to resolve the criminal case and even determines where the truth lies, he does not have the tools to do it. After all, he was not present at the scene. He could even go as far as saying that there's no such thing as truth. Although in this particular case, this would come down to denying facts, since either Angelo did use a knife to attack the officers in the shed, or he did not and was shot immediately. There's only two possibilities. It's as simple as that. In the end, the question is simply, is it legitimate for the anthropologist to try to know what did happen and therefore undertake a counter-investigation, that is, redo the work of the public prosecutor and the examining magistrate, which led to the dismissal of the case. In his famous 1966 presidential lecture for the Society for the Study of Social Problems, whose side are we on, Howard Baker responds to the criticism of bias in favor of the subordinate groups, often formulated against social scientists, to be on the side of the dominated. His argument is that the way stories are told in most situations, that is what we call the official narrative, correspond to the version of the superordinate groups, that is the dominant group, be they police, judges, teachers, physicians, while ignoring the delinquent youth, the drug addicts, the students, the patients version. By giving voice to the subordinates, the social scientists then re-establish a certain balance between the two perspectives. That's what he says. But they even go further, as they even denounce the frequent lies of the superordinate, the dominants, who have to pretend that they fit what is expected from them, even if it is not the case. In Angelo's situation, there are two reasons why the superordinate version, that of the police, become the official narrative, and the subordinate one, that of the family, is dismissed. First, there is what we can call the hierarchy of credibility, which is, of course, in favor of those who have an authority. Second, there is this, what we can call the strength of affinities, which advantages those who belong to the same professional networks. Here, the hierarchy of credibility is extreme, as the credit granted to the sworn-in elite officers dramatically contrasts with the discredit that members of the traveler community, Roma people, are subjected to, as they have the reputation of being disingenuous and deceitful. Besides, the strength of affinities, the second criteria, between the judges and the police is due to their professional links, as judges need the police who bring them criminals. Whereas, on the contrary, Roma people living in the margins of the urban space, often near the trash dump or the sewage treatment plant, are socially miles away from the upper class to which the judges belong. As I read the prosecutor's report and the magistrate's decision, it was clear that they gave very little credence and even room to the family's account of the incident, almost ignoring their version in the final analysis of the dismissal order. However, contrary to Howard Baker's position, that I just reminded you, my point was not to stand on anyone's side, but to strictly treat, as you heard, all statements in the same manner. Hence the parallel presentation of the narratives without presuming who told the truth. Such positioning as neutral as possible, never completely neutral, but as neutral as possible, is crucial for two reasons. First, all protagonists deserve the same respect, the police and the family. Second, appearing to take side would disserve the cause one would want to defend. So how to proceed? To return to Nietzsche, it should be noted that in the well-known passage of his Genealogy of Morals, his sentence continues saying, I quote, "The more eyes, different eyes we can use to observe one thing, the more complete our concept of this thing, our objectivity be." In other words, if we multiply the perspectives, we get closer to what he calls objectivity. In Angelo's case, this epistemological principle led me to bring together both the perspectives of the various protagonists and the perspectives of the technical reports. In other words, those of the officers and of the autopsy, of the parents and the ballistics, of the coroner and the weapon examination. In Bruno Latour's words, these perspectives bring together actors and actants in conversation in search for a possible alternative to the judicial truth. Indeed, the prosecutor had several times publicly, enigmatically, but probably lucidly said that what would come out of the investigation would be, as I said before, the judicial truth. In the second phase of my research, exploring what this truth was based on, I noticed that not only had all the accounts not been equally considered, but the technical reports had been ignored when they seemed to be contradicting the police version, and had even sometimes been modified to make them fit it. My work was therefore to investigate anew each piece, statements, as well as reports. To continue the filmographic parallel, my approach, if I may say so, had somewhat to do with that of another film that you may know, Sidney Lumet's famous 1957 12 Angry Men, in which the protagonist, who is a member of the jury, progressively reverses his colleagues' view on the supposed criminal to the point that at the end, they decide collectively that he's not the criminal, that he didn't kill that person. So let me illustrate each of these two troubling points, the witnesses' accounts and the technical reports. First, the fact that the narratives of the parents and the officers conflicted was not much of a surprise, of course. But the fact that the accounts of the 5 officers who were together when Angelo was killed were so different and even incompatible was much more intriguing. So here I will name a first and second officer, the 2 men who shot and killed Angelo, and first, second, and third gendarme, their 3 colleagues who were with them in the shed. So just an excerpt to show you these differences of versions between the police office, the gendarme and officers. So thus, at the moment when Angelo is discovered, a first gendarme asserts that he sees an individual curled into a ball, that he asks him to raise his hands, which he does immediately, staying in this position for a moment without moving, even though he then orders him to come forward. The second officer, who stands at his side, states that when he is revealed by the laser light, the man turns to face them, gesticulates, shouts, abuses them, refuses to obey the repeated command to lie on the ground. The first officer, who is just behind his two colleagues, says that he arrived a few seconds after the objective was found, but maintains that the man did not utter a sound at any point in the intervention. The second gendarme hears his comrade tells the individual to come forward as he is standing in front of them in a boxing stance, with raised his fists. The third gendarme offers hardly any details. In short, during this first moment of interaction, was Angelo motionless or agitated? Was he yelling or silent? Did he raise his hands in the air or hold up fists? And was he ordered to get up, to lie down, or to come forward? It seems surprising to have so contradictory remembrances of these moments. Then, during the confrontation itself, the first gendarme recounts that as he moves to seize the individual, the man puts up a struggle and pulls a knife, making sweeping gestures in front of him. Swerving away from a knife thrust, he falls with his assailant, and as he ends up lying alongside him on the floor, manages to seize his wrist and make him let go the knife. Then he hears gunshots. According to the second officer, is the one who tries to bring the individual under control without using a weapon, but stops when he hears his colleague call out that there is a knife. He discerns the man trying to stab his colleagues in the throat, fires the first time, takes a blow on the chin, and falls backward. Then, as he is lying on the floor, he sees the individual still standing and fires a second time before he loses consciousness. The first officer, who does not describe any attempt to seize the man and does not see him with a knife, that's the story I evoked earlier, even wondering if he is not actually carrying a handgun. He recounts that the individual lunges at his colleagues, that one of them falls backward, that the other is dragged towards the wall, that shots are fired and someone shouts, "I'm hit," which he interprets as an injury to one of his comrades. When he sees the man moving toward him, threatening, he fires point blank. Blood gushes and the individual collapses. The second gendarme reports that he approaches the objective, that's how they call the target, and tries unsuccessfully to take him by the shoulder. The man first remained in initial position, still making circular gestures with his weapon, then makes a faint movement forward. Gunshots ring out, but he continues to walk toward the gendarme with his knife out. Eventually, he collapses. And finally, the third gendarme sees the first and second try to grab hold of the target, who pushes them away and pulls out his blade. The man approaches the gendarme and tries to cut them with circular movements. Someone opens fire. He is still moving forward. Then he all fall on the ground, including the individual, and he described the confrontation as a rugby scrum. So what actually happened in this crucial moment? How could the officer who fired the allegedly fatal shot never have seen the knife when he describes the man advancing aggressively toward him? Could someone really have shouted, "I'm hit," as he says, when 4 out of the 5 other gendarmes did not hear it? Was it 1, 2, or 3 of them who grabbed hold of the target before he pulled out his weapon? And did 1, 2, or 4 of them end up on the floor at the end of the sequence? And lastly, did Angelo collapse immediately after receiving the coup de grâce, as the officer who fired facing him says? Or did he continue to struggle when he had fallen on the ground, wrestling with the gendarme, as 2 of his colleagues claim? Second element, the reports, the technical reports. The contradictions here and the problems here are as intriguing as they are with the testimonies. 2 examples taken from the autopsy and the ballistics will exemplify how the forensic were dealt with. So it sometimes happens that in an official document, a single detail gives the key to its reading, even unbeknownst to its authors. So there is such a detail in the final ruling of the magistrate. In order to prove, which is very important for the decision of legitimate defense, to prove the absence of intention to cause death, the ruling states that the autopsy established that no bullet has penetrated a vital organ, and therefore concludes that the officers used their weapons purely to contain their target. This point is essential for the dismissal of the case, for it means that homicidal intent is manifestly excluded. But what does the autopsy report say? There are 5 entry wounds, 4 of them in the thorax. 1 of the bullets passed through the pericardium, the right atrium, and the right ventricle, that is through the heart. There is an hemothorax with a liter of blood on the right side and more than a liter on the left. In sum, not only was the heart penetrated, as were the lungs, but the massive hemorrhage caused almost instantaneous death. But this example is part of a general strategy of the magistrate and the prosecutor of excluding facts that might contradict the gendarme's version. In particular, a crucial piece of information from the ballistics is not taken into consideration. The 5 bullets that hit the victim were all fired from above, entering the body at very marked angles to the horizontal and even almost vertical, so from up to down. The 2 men who fired the fatal shot could therefore only have been well above the victim and very close to him. Yet the 5 gendarmes who were in the shed state that their target was standing, the 2 who fired described themselves as facing him, therefore at the same height, and the one who fell being below the victim, so from down to up. But the judge's ruling slightly modifies the conclusion that is in the report. So having the 2, I could compare them. She substitutes one adverb for another, and she places it in inverted comma as if it were a quotation, so that the bullet paths are described as probably, rather than generally, from the front to the back and from above to below. Moreover, it discards the autopsy report in the final discussion, arguing for the dismissal. There are other examples that I will not detail of falsification of facts, including the placing of a knife in line with the hand of the victim, as if he had let it go, whereas the officers say themselves that they turned his body over after he was dead. And also mere negligence of crucial elements such as the coroner version on the phone with his colleague, in which he mentioned that he had been told that the man had no weapon, but asked to remain discreet about it, a statement which the judge rules out as the result of the emotional distress. So to return to the initial assertion, just an object inadvertently left at the scene of a crime can serve as evidence that will help to identify the perpetrator. Here, the note of the absence of injury to the vital organ, carelessly left for the reader to come across, reveals itself as the signature of a strategy of argument to confirm the police version. That the police would forge elements to argue for their legitimate defense when they shoot and kill, and that the justice system would tend to accept their narrative is not surprising. In the United States, for example, the word testifying, which is a combination, a neologism of testifying and lying, is used in police precincts and among lawyers to reflect the falsification of facts by the police. And it should be reminded that when a citizen kills someone, the grand jury advises the public prosecutor to indict him, to indict the criminal, the shooter, 99% of the time. Whereas if the perpetrator of the killing is a police officer, it declines to file charges in 99% of cases, exactly the opposite. So after having examined thoroughly both the protagonist statements and the technician reports, I came to a very different version, as you can imagine, of what had happened that day, which I reconstitute on the basis of the witnesses' testimony and their contradiction on the one hand, and the technical reports on their bias used by the magistrate on the other hand. In a book that you may have heard about or read, The Judge and the Historian, Carlo Ginzburg, the Italian historian, while recognizing that the notion of evidence and truth have been challenged, and I would add rightly so, we should not take truth and evidence as obvious, as going without saying. He writes that the historian is entitled to see a problem when the judge would pronounce a dismissal, and I contend that it is also the case for the ethnographer. I already mentioned that there were two biases in the justice system in John Angelo's case, the hierarchy of credibility and the strength of affinities. In other words, the judicial truth was enmeshed in relation of power. In fact, deciding to indict the two officers who caused Angelo's death by considering that there was no legitimate defense, not only would have been a shock for the institution, but would have affected the judge's career. The ethnographer did not have this involvement in the penal system. He could consider just evidence, both testimonial and forensic, outside of these power relations. At least this is what I thought when I wrote the book, but I will show that it was not entirely, I was not entirely outside of this power relation. So after some hesitation, I decided, in reference to the prosecutor's phrase, to call what would be revealed at the end of my counter investigation an ethnographic truth, in contrast with the judicial truth. And I know that that formulation would ruffle anthropologists on two counts, because they wouldn't like ethnographic and because they wouldn't like truth. But let me justify the two words. First, I take ethnographic rather extensively to emphasize the fact that, as in any ethnography, I paid the same attention to everyone, independently of their social status, and I used all the information I could collect in the field without distorting it or trying not to. For Claude Lévi-Strauss, ethnography is collecting facts and artifacts. I think that it is much more than that, but it is also that, and this is what I try to do. Second, I consider truth, the second word, not as absolute, but I consider it in a pragmatist formulation as the end of inquiry. For Charles Peirce, the pragmatist philosopher, founder of pragmatism, truth is what we would agree upon were inquiry to be pursued as far as it could fruitfully go. So truth is not something that can be validated. It is something that we progressively validate and at some point we agree upon. So in the justice system, they agree that this judicial truth is the truth and they dismiss the case. In the ethnographic truth, I do the same. I do the inquiry, and at the end of the inquiry, I say this is the ethnographic truth. And I let my readership, or here my audience, decide whether they agree with where my investigation leads me. And they can disagree, they can agree with the magistrate. However, the inquiry should not stop here. What is at issue in this tragedy cannot only be reduced to the question of whether the two officers who fired did so in legitimate self-defense or not. We have to examine the structural conditions of possibility of such a tragedy. Why was an operation mobilizing 24 elite gendarmes in assault formation for the arrest of a man whose main crimes consisted of driving without a license and non-violent thefts, and whom a sentence enforcement judge had assessed as a low enough risk to give him home leave from prison 2/3 of the way through his sentence? So why was this operation ordered in the first place? You may remember that they are usually used in terrorist attacks or kidnapping cases. My interpretation is that in a growing climate of fear and security, the proliferation of special police units tasked with intervening in extreme situations has led to the lowering of their threshold for intervention. There used to be only one GIGN in France. Now there's one central, and there are 4 or 5 other regional. And of course, you have to use them when they are there. And fortunately, terrorist attacks and kidnapping are relatively rare events. So they are not going to, these units are not, elite units are not going to stay without acting during the full year and several years. They have to be intervening. And so you lower the threshold of intervention of these units. And you see the same thing with the special unit in the police and the special unit in prison as well. You see them intervening in lower and lower situation, the risk situation. But it is not just that they intervene that this was decided, but it is decided for travelers, for Roma family. And why? This is not something that would happen in the general population. You cannot imagine that if someone does not come back to prison after 24 hours, they would send the GIGN. They do it because it's a Roma population. And this first because Roma population are imagined as dangerous. And this is something I observed in a previous research. They are feared in a way that is quite irrational, given that only in exceptional cases do they attack people outside their own community, and still less law enforcement officers. But second, the gendarmes know that even if they do abuse their authority during an intervention in this community, there are no consequences, as demonstrated by the fact that the humiliation of the family and the destructive search of their residence gave rise to neither apology nor compensation. It is thus the denigration and the marginalization of travelers, of Roma people, that makes possible what would be unimaginable in other social contexts. The racism towards them that permeates the whole of society in France and other countries, and has deep historical roots in European societies, is the ultimate sociological cause of Angelo's death. It is the cause of death rather than simply two officers, in my interpretation, awkwardly shooting this man. But to do this exercise that I just presented to you is not completely without risks. I soon became aware that using the documents I had in my possession was illegal. So I could read them, but I could not use them because they are protected by something that is very important, which is the secret of the investigation. When a case is dismissed, it means that the persons are innocent, and so you cannot go into the documents that the judge has looked into and redo what I just did, redo the inquiry. And this is good because it's a protection for people who are decided to be innocent by the justice system. The problem is that when it is the police that is implicated in these situations, it's almost always a dismissal, and therefore you cannot have any access to the pieces, the documents of the cases. And violating this secret of the judicial investigation is punished by a maximum of 45,000 euros fine. But there's only one person who can authorize the use of these documents. It is the prosecutor. And so I went to see the prosecutor and I asked him whether he could authorize me to have the documents and use them in a book, I explained. And when we first met, I said, I've read your book, Enforcing Order, my book on the police. And so considering what I had written in this book, I thought that he would deny me the permission to use the book, to use the documents. But he did. He said, I like the book, to my surprise. And so he trusted me and gave me the document. In fact, I already had them, but he gave them to me, and I recorded him when he said that to me. He had accepted to be recorded, and so I had the evidence that I had been permitted by the prosecutor. And to avoid being prosecuted by the Ministry of the Interior or the Gendarmerie, I very clearly expressed my thanks to the prosecutor for having given me this permission, so that they would know that I did that legally. But there was a second problem, which I discovered a few months later. And this one was more difficult to solve. I was at that time correcting the proofs of the book, and a lawyer consulted by the publisher said that there was another legal issue, the risk of being accused of defamation of the police. Defamation of the police, because I showed that in my version, that the police had lied, that their colleagues had lied, and that the whole institution of the GIGN had lied. And this is punished by 1 year of imprisonment and 15,000 euros fine. So I was suggested not to call it a truth, as I said, ethnographic truth, but to call it an alternative version or another interpretation. And I was tempted to do so, but then I thought that it would be coward to do that. I had done this work, and I wanted to put, not that I said that I necessarily right, but in front of the judicial truth, which has been the end of the judicial inquiry, I wanted to put the ethnographic truth, which is the end of the ethnographic inquiry. And to do that, I had to take the risk that, and the publisher supported me, I had to take the risk that to be accused of calumny towards the administration. Fortunately, I was not. The book was published, and there was no, I was not. I should say that the book came out the first week of the confinement. So the bookstores were closed. No one heard about the book. And so, and I think the Gendarmerie had no interest in making the case public by persecuting me, because everything would have been on the table. There would have been a trial. There would have been, which would have been very terrible for me, but that would have been not been good for them too. So I said that the book was published, but with no readers and no comment in the media, at least at the beginning. But still, the book had a public life, which I think is interesting, and I will end with that. The case went through all the steps, all the stages in the French judicial system. There was the first instance, there was the appeal, and there was the Cour de Cassation, and which did not examine the case because they considered that it was not relevant. They are just on the formal aspect, that there was not anything on the formal side that justifies. So everything was done in France. But when in a country in Europe, and this is not European Union, it's European Convention. So when the case is over, you can still go to the European Court of Human Rights. And the European Court of Human Rights can decide whether the case is interesting or not. So interesting means that you have sufficient elements, first, and second, that it has a general value. They decided that it was the case. There were sufficient elements, but also it has a general value on the functioning of the police and the justice system in France. And so to present the case to the European Court of Asylum, the family decided to include the second part of my book, the counter investigation. And of course, we're waiting now for the decision of the European Court. I would say that it is important to understand, and you know certainly, that the decision of the court, even if they find the case as my analysis is, there will be nothing for the officers. The officers have been definitively considered innocent. They will never go for this again to a trial. But the French state would be on trial, and the French state would be condemned, possibly, for its police action, the exaggerated intervention, and the justice system for neglecting certain aspects of the case. And this would go with a fine for the French state, which would be a compensation for the family. And for me and for them, this would mean that truth would finally have been told and that justice would have ultimately prevailed. Thank you very much. I know I've been very long, but I very much appreciate your patience.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your presentation. Now we have the opportunity to open the floor for your questions. Whether you wish to delve deeper in the subject of today's lecture or explore broader themes from Professor Fassin's extensive body of work, including his research on the refugees or migrants on the Balkan route, please raise your hand if you have a question and just state your name and affiliation. We will start with.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Professor. Interesting story, scientific experiment. I'm so glad that you recognize that it's part of systematic racism structure and culture that is going on. And I just want to highlight some thought that I have, that maybe you also, I don't know if you have considered that thought. The thought is that it's not so much about who has the more truth or so. It's who has the more truth or what is the truth story. It's more about which story is conveniently accepted. Pretty much what you said, credibility. That the fact that the judiciary, the judges and everybody ruled in favor of the police officers is not so much about they believe the truth is that they didn't kill him. They know the truth, I think. The judges, and they know the truth. It's just convenient for the system of racism to go for that truth. That it's like a theater show. So they have created a play that this is the story we will go with, and everybody's on board with that. Because the convenience is that a person who belongs to a community that they don't really care much for is dead. So what? They don't really care. So I'm just wondering if you have considered that train of thought, that it's like a show. it's like a theater. It's not about the truth. It's about what we want to achieve and what we want to avoid. Thank you.
Sanj.
Thank you very much. My name is Samir. I'm a socio-legal scholar here. So many of the names that you referenced, for example, Sally Engel, Mary, Max Gluckman, and Howard Becker are very much appreciated by my side to be uttered here at this faculty, because this is not the case every so often. I was very intrigued by your lecture, and I have two specific questions in regard to your question. In regard to your lecture. So first, we know that in socio-legal studies, when you come to study or research the judicial system, including the police enforcement agencies such as policemen and police agencies, there is some sort of institutional response in terms that they perceive it as an intrusion, and they try to block all the venues of inquiry. So to understand that at the end, you had a meeting that was quite amicable with the prosecutor was quite surprising. I did not expect that turn. But before that, what was your experience as an outsider, as an outside researcher dealing with the members of the law enforcement agents? And the second question is more technical. In the judicial process, was the absent document or the coroner report, was it absent because of the prosecutors, didn't really submit the document or didn't submit it in the formal and valid legal form? Or was it just a subject of judicial oversight in the magistrate, in the judicial process by the magistrate? This is maybe one of the most crucial questions. So I'll just end it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sandra, put it.
Oh, sorry. Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Fassin, for this really lovely lecture. I'm Dr. Adam Chilak from Middle East Technical University, and I have some few, let's say, comments / question. I don't know. Well, your investigation itself remind me the works of forensic architecture, which is part of the Goldsmiths, University of London, and they're actively engaging with the cases, like with kind of like preparing some videos and usually using the digital recourse that they can find and somehow underestimated, I can say, and then making videos or artworks to make it also like to reach to the wider audience, not just to the legal procedure and so on. So this was somehow like in accordance with your research. So I don't know if you are somehow in contact with them, but somehow related to Dr. Kalicu's comments, actually, like what kind of those detailed works are saying for us in the kind of like major outcomes, right? Like what kind of like state-societal relations that we should consider after those all detailed proof in the age of post-truth. The problem is that age of the post-truth, if you would like to put it in that way. So at least for me, like the problem itself is that those are showing the truth, but not somehow like paid attention in the same time as the kind of like mainstream perspective is more focusing on the a bit fake percentage in all kind of like truth relations. So the state itself is not maybe for the first time showing itself as a kind of like rejecting the whole how can I put it in a better way? Just like I don't want to really waste the time, but what I say is that itself is that like we all know that in all kind of states there is a kind of like a kind of like feeling that is protecting itself as a state in those kind of cases to protect itself from any kind of like accusations or criticism and so on, and these are usually covered by the law itself. So the law system itself is a part of the state. So when we are talking about the law and truth, and as an opposite side, the let's say police and police order, or the people who function for the state itself, what I feel as a political scientist itself, where we are talking about the same and one unit who are protecting each other as usual, and not in the new case. So what we can do as the other side, let's say the civil society, So shall we just gonna accuse one more time that you're doing fake things, or we're gonna take a different action? This, or I don't know how. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Yellen, and I'm a teacher of psychology here. So my question is in that area, because a lot of students of social security studies is here. So I would like to ask you, from your perspective, are there any protective, I would say, factors that you would like to maybe mention that persons who would be in situations like those policemen were, that they can be protective factors that we need to know about them, because we know the situation, that role that those persons are having, that power that those persons are having, are also one big issue in doing in whole this situation. So what would you suggest, or what you would recommend, or to give some maybe your opinion about what to have not to be killing policemen? And my other question is where you are finding your courage as a researcher to go into this subject.
Hello, I'm Yolanda Weima. I am from York University in Toronto, from Geography and the Center for Refugee Studies. And next month, I'll be starting at University of Bologna. And so my question is about the idea of truth and credibility, which is also important in, I think, in your other field of study in refugee and asylum claims, or questions around deportation and return. And I was wondering how you see relevance of your work on truth in the field of forced migration studies.
Okay, thank you. I would now let Professor Yassine answer the.
Very quick
Okay.
point. Merci pour votre travail sur les questions de la migration en général et aussi sur ces cas de la police. Thank you very much for your work and for providing this very comprehensive and also detailed overview. I would like just to echo the colleague Collergiu and Colat about the institutional racism, and also this kind of stigmatization of a specific labeled as such categories, because in the interest also, according to not only legal anthropology and all this, the scientific support and disciplines, but also international relations studies and security studies. So being in the interest in these interest areas, and also the also in line with the question already asked about a role of art, I would like to also echo the role of media, and if is there a specific timeline, as your work was very, very intensive in that sense, a specific timeline to proceed with counter investigation before media and also media representation also provided another framework, another pervasive version and multiple versions of the what happened.
Multiple versions.
Yeah, the role of media in kind of altering the facts. And so if it's there in the ethnographic work, a specific timeline to proceed with these counter investigations. Thank you.
So let's now to answer the questions. Okay.
So thank you very much for very very thoughtful and very very profound, many cases questions. So so the convenient truth and the theater or the show, I think that is a very relevant way of putting it, and it's true that neither in the book nor in my presentation now have I studied further what was at stake on this side. So I wanted to show the how it worked and to give elements to the readers to make their understanding. But I could have gone further, and I could have said what you said, which is a reformulation of what I say when I explain, although I did it quickly here, but more substantially in the book, that first of all, this strange expression, the prosecutor at a few hours after the killing, asking the family to come to testify, and they don't want to testify. They say, you know, you didn't they don't even know if the son is dead. They don't have any. So and they don't want. And he says, I promise I will tell you about your son, and I promise I will tell. We will do everything to find the truth. But mysteriously, or not mysteriously, because it's but he says, and that will be, you don't say we'll call it, he said, that will be the judicial truth. And when he says that, it puts on the table really that this will be what society will have as a response to what happened. And you're right to say the convenient response, because what would have been, you know, if he had taken another, if he or the judges had taken a different way. First of all, there would be intervention that at the level of the highest level of the state, because you cannot say that not only individual police officers, but the whole system of this elite unit that is used in that is a model in the world for its intervention, that they have not only killed by mistake, by lack of experience, by lack of competence, but that they have lied all the way, and everything. You know, I could not say it here, but there's a moment after when the head of the unit brings everyone together, and it's certain that at that moment, the moment of the debriefing, they are trying to make a story that would be coherent, except that they don't give enough detail to the police officers, and then when some of them, you know, the guy who described the rugby scrum, you know, he didn't have to say that. He could have said the guy fell, you know, but he wants to make the story nicer, to make the story more believable, except that the other ones don't tell that same story, you know, because they or they give another story to make it more believable. So it would have been really a big thing if the GIGN had been accused of. But for the judges, the magistrates, it would have been not the end of their career, but they would have been put aside. They would not have been kept in criminal courts, because, you know, these people are not. She would have been considered as not too dangerous for the institution. So you're right. There's something that the institution is protecting itself, which brings me to your question about the documents. In fact, what is very important is what I said briefly at the beginning, is that so you have the investigators who are gendarmes, who are interrogating their colleagues. And then you have the prosecutor who is using these documents, these hearings, and has his version. And a year and a half later, 2 years later, at the end of the examining sequence by the judge, the prosecutor proposes it's like it has a special name, but it proposes the charges or his evaluation of the case. It's called like the opportunity. Okay, so it's a document that brings together all the elements and gets to a suggestion of decision. The lawyer of the family has at this moment the possibility to reply, to respond, which she did, and she did it by contesting a series of facts, much less than I did, because she cannot, lawyer cannot spend the time that I spend for this and go into this detail. She has to run her life and to do other cases as well. But she contested, and then the two documents, the prosecutor and the lawyers, go to the magistrate, and the magistrate was supposed to give her decision at that time. The decision being simply not guilty or not guilty, absolutely not. The decision was trial or not trial. That's the decision, and there were elements. No one knew what she would say, and she, when I interviewed her, she didn't say what, of course, but she it might have been that she would have expressed the necessity of a trial because of many elements that she had, and she had shown her suspicion that something was wrong. But 2 weeks before she would have given her decision, and we're talking about 2 years of the whole process, 2 weeks before that, she's sent to another jurisdiction. She's sent to another jurisdiction, and which is a jurisdiction that is close to where where a family, she wanted that jurisdiction. And I think honestly that she was relieved that she didn't have to make a decision. But the magistrate who replaces her, so I don't know how she was chosen, knowing that it was the first case she had to decide on, and everyone knew about it locally. So I don't know who decided that she would be the new criminal judge, investigative judge. But she arrives. She has never been in a criminal court. That's the first case she has. She has to give, she's not told anything. She's not told you should do that. At least that's what she's telling me, and that's what I believe. But she doesn't know anything about the case. She doesn't know anything about criminal court, and she has to give that decision. She has a very detailed analysis by the prosecutor. She basically copied what was what the prosecutor. There's very little difference between the two documents. The dismissing the ruling dismissing the case and the document of the prosecutor. So it's not only that she would have needed an incredible courage to say, I want to go over everything again. I want to do new interrogation because I want to have my own idea. I want to look back into the technical reports, the ballistics, and which she doesn't do. And she doesn't do, and you can understand it not only because she's afraid, but because she's asked to do so. So there's this. So in fact, nothing was hidden from her. To your question, nothing. But she had the document that was ready, almost ready for her to copy and reproduce. Now, how I got how I got in contact with and how they accepted to be interviewed. Not everyone, the gendarme did not accept, and I can understand, because they, that could have been at that time, the appeal was not, when I first started, the appeal was not done, so that could have, so I understand that they didn't want to be interviewed, or that the gendarmerie, it's not, I could not contact them directly. I had to contact the gendarmerie and at the national and local level, and they said no. But the judges, I had to insist. And I was frank. I told them, I'm writing a book on this case because I find it interesting, and I would like to reproduce, to present all the versions of the different, and this is what I honestly did. If you read the book, it's in English, and I really in the first part, everyone can recognize himself or herself in what I wrote. That's what they said. That's all the details, you know, the minuscule details I got from the hearings or from the interviews, they are there. So, but of course they were reluctant, and they didn't tell me everything. The prosecutor, I think he has a special personality. He's narcissistic, and he was in a very prominent case before. He liked to talk to the media and to defend his case. So and that was clear when we interacted. So I think he was happy to be interviewed by me. I should say that the first reaction of the judges, because I introduce myself every time in writing. I say, I'm a professor now, and the first response is, of course we know who you are, and which means that they, especially in the world of justice, of the justice system, I know that some lawyers, for example, one told me that yesterday too, that they would read pages of my book on the will to punish before going in court so they know who I am, and so there's no surprise in a way. I don't cheat. I tell them frankly what I'm doing. They've been honest. I've tried to be honest. Even something that the prosecutor told me I don't put in the book because I didn't want to embarrass him or to put him in a. So I don't try to do that. I try to go to the fact. I will go a little faster. So forensic architecture, yes, you're right. I know some of them. I know their work. I appreciate very much their work. And there are some commonalities with my second part and with the part. I think they are just after the truth. I'm also after the truth making, the truth telling, which doesn't mean that it is the truth, but the way people tell their truth. So it's different in this way, but they have an incredible talent, and they can do things that are much more that are much more effective in a way than writing a book. But I think we're doing two different things, and I hope that I bring social science and anthropology in particular in my work. The fact that it is that there's a cover-up by the state, it's obvious. It's obvious, and this is something we've had. I don't know how much you get about what happened in France in the last 6 months, for example. But also you could go to the Yellow Vest also. The denial by the Ministers of the Interior, and even of the French president of police violence, when you have so many videos, when you have people sending complaints to hundreds of complaints to the Ministry of the Interior and saying you cannot, and you have people who are mutilated, you are eyes, hands, and saying that there's denial. So there's a strange cover-up in a way, because this cover-up is relatively subtle. The one because people in the area in the region where this happened, they think that he's a Roma guy, he has a knife, they always, and they struggle with knives and they fight with knives, and so they don't see how unlikely it is, even if you just think of it just 1 minute, with the weapon they have, with the protection they have, etc. But it is subtle because you have the whole justice system, as your colleague was saying before, that is doing the theater, and so but it's even more troubling when you have police violence in the streets and everyone sees it, and it's you have videos all over, and the president says you cannot speak of police violence because police. Because the state, the police is the representative of the state as having the monopoly of the use of physical force, which is an absurd interpretation of Max Weber, of course. But here you have to think differently than in my case. You have to think that this cover-up, or this denial, is not exactly a cover-up. The first case, it's a cover-up. In the second, it's a denial, and of course, I in my lecture at the Collège de France 2 days ago, I was talking about what happened in Croatia, and you have the previous president being interviewed by the Swiss television, and the Swiss journalists say, we've seen, we've heard, and we've read reports about the violence at the border in your country. And her answer is, yeah, I heard that, but I asked the Minister of the Interior, I asked the director of the police, I asked some police, some officers on the ground, and they tell me, no, there's no violence. And it's massive. You have the European investigation, you have NGOs investigation, you have testimonies all over. And I've asked the Minister of the Interior, and he says no. And the Minister of the Interior 1 year before, as you probably know because you're in the area, was saying that the wounds that the refugees have on their body, they make themselves these wounds to criticize the Croatian state, So they would not criticize the Bosnian state, but they criticize the Croatian. So yeah, no, but you're right that the question of covering up is very, especially when it's so obvious, it becomes very problematic. The protection for how to avoid police doing that. I think we are unfortunately in a time when there's state and government's legitimation of police violence in many places in the world. So the denial and the impunity, the combination of the two, render it extremely difficult to diminish the police violence, when another attitude, which would be to render them accountable for what they do, to retribute, to sanction in a broad way, that is to sanction positively those who are doing their work and negatively those who are committing violence. In France recently, some of those who have been the most violent have been promoted. The police officers, they've been promoted, they receive medals. So when you do that, you're doing exactly the opposite of what could be done to have the police protect itself and protect its image. The courage. No, first of all, I think that when you become a professor, you do not have much risk in I would not say that to do that for a student. I wouldn't say that for an assistant professor when you're a full professor. If it's the time when you think, well, I should not do it because I'm a full professor and very legitimate, I should not do this kind of thing because this is a different kind of risk. It's not a risk of promotion. It's a risk of deteriorating your image or something. I think if it is the case, then you never can take the step to make the step to do things that you think are important. So I don't think there's much courage in this case because I knew that there were some legal risks. But I was also I was extremely moved by this story. And first, and second, because I got all these documents, I have all the documents that exist on this case, I have them. I thought, if I don't do it, when there are so many other cases that are relatively similar, but where no one has the documents or has the possibility to use them because I think this case becomes an example or even an exemplar of a more general situation of young men being killed by the police in total impunity. So I felt that I had a responsibility for something general, but also I felt that it was the least I could do if, at the end of my own inquiry, which I would not have written the book if I had doubts. Because, I would not have written a book to say, I agree with the prosecutor and with the investigators. That made no sense. So I would simply have abandoned my project, but in fact, I abandoned everything I was doing at the time. I was writing my lectures for the Collège de France. I stopped that to do this investigation because for me that was a priority. And the father was very sick. So he said, when will your book be out? I said, well, it takes at least 1.5 years to write it, and so it will be out maybe in 2 years. He said, I will be dead. So there was this atmosphere of urgency
Good decision. Decision making is very something, but it makes us more persons, more researchers, more really to that.
Thank you. So truth about migration. So I wrote an article some years ago, published in Public Culture, which is titled "Truth: The Truth of Asylum," and I've been doing a research for more than a year in the National Court of Asylum in France, and I tried to see how the different theories of truth, philosophical theories of truth, could be used to account for the decisions of the National Court of Asylum for refugees, so to give the status of refugee to some people. And of course, the most obvious would be the correspondent theory. There's a correspondence between what people say. I've been the victim of violence and persecution in my country, and so what the decision is. But in fact, there's less and less credibility from the perspective of the judges in these courts, in France, and so they do not. They do not believe what people say, and even they do not. So they do not even necessarily believe the document. So I've seen in one case the photo of a man in Bangladesh. His house had been burned down, and he had been beaten, and he was in a hospital. And you see him in the hospital. He has wounds all over. He has these bandage, everything, and the judge says, "What guarantees that you didn't fall from your bicycle?" And so you see that the correspondence is not enough. So then you have another theory, which is the trying to find the name, where there's a convergence between what people say and what they are, what they look like. So, for example, someone who will be crying will be, or on the contrary, in some cases, would be completely serious, but not showing emotion. But someone says, well, in their culture, they don't show their emotion or something. You have all these scenarios possible. On the contrary, a woman who is dressed in a fancy way, that's a very bad way to go to the National Court of Asylum. So this has nothing to do with what people say. It is the way they are dressed, or they behave, or etc. And then at some point, neither of them can sometimes work, either correspondence or this other, and that's when the pragmatist theory is the real one. It is the end of inquiry. It is the moment when there's a consensus about this person deserves to be recognized as a refugee, and this was very troubling, because I was working in particular with those who prepared the document for the judge, and most of them were left-oriented, politically left-oriented, and so they had very much sympathy for the asylum seekers. And we would have an afternoon, a session with 10 asylum seekers being in the court, and there would be only 2 as an average who would get, sometimes even less. Let's say 2 on average who would get. And me listening to the stories, I would have believed at least 8 of them. And so at the end, I would go to this rapporteur, that's the name they have, and I would ask, so what did you think of today? And I would expect that they would say that was very frustrating, because I would have liked that at least 5 or 6 of them. And their reaction was, I think we did a good job today. I think that the right decision were made. So you see how you have this in the end, that is what the inquiry gets to, that becomes the truth. And of course, it's the social truth in any way. If you're rejected, you're rejected. So you become an undocumented migrant. You're not an asylum seeker anymore. So that's the truth, social truth. But it's more than the social truth. It is a truth that is believed by people who have made it. And quickly, sorry, I'm very long. So, what was the question about institution? Yeah, no, yeah. So yeah, about the media. So most of the time, the journalists do not. So I had a long conversation with the journalist after the book was published. He apologized for not having met me before. He said he loved the book, and he wrote or he did an interview, which I always do written interviews. I don't do oral interviews. So that yeah, I know exactly what will be the paper, and in a case like that is very important, of course. So he did an interview, whole page in the local newspaper. That was the most important thing for the family, because that's where the son had his name and the story had been his son had been defamed, and the story had been distorted, and to have and I'm always prudent, not for legal reason, but simply because I was not there. So I say this is where my investigation takes me, but I so the journalist explained to me how he worked, which is exactly what I had written, not knowing him, but knowing about his work. He has to write a paper a day, basically, and so his only information, he goes to the prosecutor's office or to the prosecutor's talk, and he writes down and he reproduces that, and he doesn't have time to go to see the family, and that made him think that maybe he should do it, for other cases, but this you really have to think, and I'm sure that's true here too, this local regional, we have a name in France, we call it regional press, regional media. They and they're very much read. They're much more read than Le Monde or Libération. They have more readers. People read what is of their region. In the United States, they only intellectuals and academics read the New York Times or the Washington Post. The others, they read what is their region or even their town, and that's a constraint that they have. They cannot do investigation. So, and the case didn't get to the national level. So there was no way it could be. It could become, and for a journalist at the national level, that's not an interesting story. What a Roma person being killed by the police, and he's a delinquent. That's sad, and that should not happen. But that's it. You're not going to do a counter investigation, and honestly, to do what I did, that takes a long time. So I understand that they cannot do that. But at least they could interview the family. He could have interviewed the family, and he recognized it in himself. So yeah, the media are under constraints, but I'm always surprised to see how they tend to use the official version without verifying the facts, or sometimes verifying them a few days later, but the lies of the official version are everywhere. That was the case for some protests that were harshly repressed in France recently, and you have the version of the prefecture, the version of the Ministry of the Interior, and of course 2 days later or 3 days later there's some adjustment of this, but people have heard that first version, and that's enough for the state to impose its version. So thank you very much for your questions
So-
and comments.
Thank you. Since I know that you came directly from the airport to give this lecture, we actually earned a little bit rest today in Sarajevo. And enjoy your stay.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Very much. Thank you very much. We couldn't even anticipate the closure.